so much, everyone, for making the time to be with us tonight. I'm here to introduce Kieran Block, but before I do, I just wanted to say that after Kieran's presentation, we will be inviting questions. So at any point through the presentation, if a question strikes you, you can use the Q&A function like Brett just did. And in the Q&A function, you can leave a question. I will then ask those questions to Kieran afterwards. So to introduce Kieran, first I'd like to say the title of his talk. The talk today is titled Psychological Experience of a Black Parahockey Athlete. Kieran Block is a world champion in the sport of sledge hockey, and he is also currently teaching in Edmonton, Alberta. I imagine it is a very difficult this week being a teacher, making it to the holidays. So thank you so much, Kieran, for joining us tonight. As the first Black sledge hockey player in the country, he is using his experience to guide his career shift as he studies to become a psychologist. So welcome, Kieran, to our speaker series.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I will just kind of get going with the conversation that I want to have today. And if you've heard me talk, this is going to be a little bit different as I'm excited to share some of just really what I've been learning and studying, both in my counseling and then just as I've been relating it to my experience in life. And I'm just going to more or less take us through some of my personal experiences as being the first Black sledge hockey player in the country, which I mean is a pretty cool feat. I'm so honored to be able to say that. I mean, it's what a cool experience. Um, Even in my family, my great uncle was uh, the first Black player to sign an NHL contract, John Utendale. So I'm grateful. I come from a long line of hockey players, and I was able to use some of those experiences. Um, but as I started playing hockey, growing up in Edmonton, sledge hockey wasn't even a consideration. It really wasn't something that I knew much about or I thought about. And as I grew up, I had a dream of playing in the NHL, as most young kids did. Difference being, I was not white, or at least not presenting as visibly white. I do come from a family where my dad is Eurocentric. He's got a huge mix of everything coming across from Europe, and then my mom, South African, and a mix of some other cultures that way. And that's where I get my Black ancestry from. Um, and so growing up, I like things would be different. And, I had conversations with my mom and dad about, just different ideas about race, but I just didn't really understand. Um, and even within my experience of sledge hockey and stand-up hockey, one thing that I won't get really into tonight, but I had a pretty significant cliff jumping accident that put me into sledge hockey, which is kind of how I got there. But I actually did make a recovery back into the stand-up game, and I finished my career playing in Stony Plain, the senior AAA league in Alberta. And part of why I highlight that is just through my recovery, I got to finish my career playing with Captain Canada Ryan Smith. So it was pretty cool, just from some of the experiences and the challenges that I definitely overcame in my career as a hockey player. And now as I kind of switch gears, I've really started focusing on how I can share some of my story of being the first Black sledge hockey player. And, when I highlight that, it's like, it's exciting. I mean, the initial insight of like I can't believe it. It's I get to be the first player to do what, and I mean, just getting to put on the Hockey Canada jersey was such a cool experience. I didn't really actually even really know that I was the first Black sledge hockey player until later, basically after my career had ended, and people kind of brought it to my attention because it wasn't something that I was like, well, I'm the first Black sledge hockey player. I was just trying to play sledge hockey like everyone else. And 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 when I made the shift to sledge hockey, it was my saving grace because I lost my ability to play. I was playing at the University of Alberta. It was after my first year, and I had this pretty serious accident. And so I thought this is an opportunity here to continue playing the game I love, a variation of it, but I get to keep playing the game I love. I get to stay involved in hockey, and now I get to sort of climb the ranks. And I was fortunate. My hockey background definitely supported me through my experience. I'm grateful that I just had the support and the mentorship in sledge hockey that also helped facilitate my transition to the new sport and help get me to the top level quite quickly. Um, but I thought like my first year, I kind of thought sledge hockey is a little different, and I'll say this: the environment was much different in terms of the players. Um, the players being all disabled at the national level, so they faced some kind of challenge or they've overcome some kind of adversity, and not the typical masculine environment that I had been a part of with the stand-up game. And that was definitely a breath of fresh air. People were inclusive, they were inviting, they were accepting of really everyone. I mean, we would tease each other about our different disabilities for sure, but it was still an accepting environment where sort of everyone was on a level playing field. Um, but where I didn't really recognize like how that would play out is when it came to my coaches. And I really did struggle after my first year with some of my coaches. Now, I also had an extremely high hockey IQ coming from the stand-up game. Now I'm playing sledge hockey where, we didn't even have a neutral zone breakout. We barely had a forecheck. And I'm coming from hockey where it was like I was a few steps away from the NHL, and we're like it was kind of like playing shinny. So that was part of what helped me to be successful early on. Even though I lacked some of the skills of the game, I was able to make up that gap through just my knowledge and my positioning and so on. But just in preparing for this, I wanted to do a little bit of research because in psychology, what I've been studying, I've taken so many different psychological courses talking about, a range from addiction, group counseling, which I just finished, to social psychology, to like just the basic intros to how to support people, create space, and a lot of what my master's program has taught me is just really that introspection. So to be aware of my biases, because when somebody comes in to sit with me as a psychologist and let's say they've abused their partner, or um, let's say there's an instance of like they assaulted somebody, let's say are harming themselves, talking about suicide or suicidal ideation. It's important that I remain neutral as much as I can in those perspectives. And if I start forming judgments, as maybe even now you might be doing, just on the initial thought or based on some of your own experience, some of those things will really actually start to shine through in our nonverbal body language. And it's not that I'm going to eliminate them, but I just want to be aware of them so that I can adjust, so that if somebody comes to me and says, I'm experiencing suicidal ideation, I'm not met with, what am I going to do? And that panic, or don't do it. I'm meeting them with, okay, so let's talk about it. And as I do that, I create the space for others to share their stories and share their experience without judgment. And so as I've been learning this, I'm like, okay, this is actually quite fascinating. So I've got a little bit of research here, and I'm just going to share it with you. And you can think about this. Have you ever met someone and immediately formed an impression based on only a quick snapshot of information? So as children, we're, told, don't, do not judge a book by its cover. Yet as adults, this happens seamlessly. So the research conducted by Casson et al. Notes that the correlation from 1 second to 1/10 of a second when measuring how trustworthy someone is or how aggressive they are is the same. So as human beings, we practice this all the way back to ancient Greece. Back then, we called it, and I had to practice how to say this, physiognomy, which is the art of reading character from faces. So further research by Hassan and Troop uncovered that you might see somebody as kind-hearted rather than mean-spirited just based on their facial feature, such as somebody having a full round face, curly hair, long lashes, dark eyes, a short nose, full lips, and an upturned mouth. So when you see somebody that looks like that, naturally we just think, oh, they're kind-hearted, um, or oh, that person's trustworthy. So then this ties into the scripts that we have of life. And then from there, and this is only, I'm skimming the surface because we just don't have the time. I mean, it's a deep rabbit hole, but it fosters things like our availability heuristic, which then activates our stereotypes, leading to prejudice and discrimination. So then that makes you wonder, what was my experience as the first Black player in Canada really like? So if people are just forming these judgments based on how I look, and let's be real, like we're not impervious to the media and the news and the way certain groups of people are portrayed. I mean, even just in my addictions class most recently, a lot of the research I uncovered talked about how like the criminalization of uh, drugs, specifically substances, was in a lot of ways used as an effort to control ethnic and racial minorities. So a lot of Blacks and Hispanics. As it came into more of a white dominated world, we started to shift. Well, let's decriminalize because it's like we're sending too many of our people to prison. So a study by Jones et al. In 1999, and the reason why I give the year is the reference of in this, they did a survey and they looked at discrimination in the NHL in 1999. So not that long ago. Um, I think I was whatever 14 years old, and that was my dream at that point. Minority discrimination is based on linguistic ethnic consideration, so that language and culture, not racial, but language, because identifiable racial differences are absolutely minimal. And this is taken verbatim from the research. So I did a quick hotkey find to look for, indigenous or African American or just like any other kind of diversity. The only thing I found was in the footnote. The research stated that the population of Canada in 1981, as it was taken in 1991, so 10 years later, was 0.1% Black, according to the ethnic origins component of the Census of Canada. So Blacks, and again, this is the research, this is how it's written in 1999, Blacks have always been a very small, virtually non-existent component of the player makeup of the NHL. I had to laugh at Blacks. I mean, excuse me. I guess we all kind of look the same, so it's easier to keep track of us this way if we just are referred to as Blacks. Like, let's make it so that there's no distinguishable trait, and we can go with some other groups as well, with to just further that notion. So further to the research I was looking at, historically, from the founding of the NHL in 1917 to the mid 1960s, over 95% of the players were Canadian. For 1967, it was 96.72% of the players were Canadian. They were Anglo or Franco. Just under 2% were Americans, and just over 1% were European. But fueled by this increased demand for players following successive league expansions from 6 teams in 1965 to 21 in 1990, in 1990, NHL players could be divided according to their ethnic backgrounds into Anglo-Canadians, Franco-Canadians, so at 68% and then 8%, Americans at 15%, and Europeans, which included a collection of Swedes, Finns, Czechs, and Russians at just under 8%. Thus, the number of potential minority groups targets has increased. I was a little bit speechless at this. There's no discussion about Indigenous, African American, or blacks, um, trans, other queer folk, Asian, disabled, not even a consideration. So you can imagine, as the first black player, when my new coach, who had been coaching, 35 plus years, basically longer than my life, and he was old school. I mean, like, he was old school through and through. And he would say he was old school, walks in through the door. What does he see when he sees this black man standing in front of him? I can only imagine what his life experience has been like throughout his involvement in hockey. And it's like I took a gulp and I grabbed a hold of something and I just got ready for the ride. Now, I always wondered what would my life be like if I was white, or at least I was able to hide. And I just wonder, like, how that shift would have been. And so I'll give you a little story of my life. There's a boy I met a while back while I was coaching sledge hockey. He was a super cute kid, maybe 9 years old at the time, and his name is Santi. I can still remember it clearly. I still remember him. I got spent a few extra moments skating over to him, chatting with him. I always really liked the kid. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, he's a little half black, half white kid. I don't really remember the rest of the kids' names. I don't know. They all sort of look the same. They're all white. So it wasn't until I started studying psychology that I began to learn about these different concepts. As I increased my awareness and recall instances that aligned with my learned information, I was able to conceptualize this experience better. So, like, I wasn't even conscious of the extra time I was actually spending talking to Santi. But then it also made me reflect on, well, what about the extra time my coaches spent talking to the next player, especially my old school coaches who didn't look like me. They didn't see themselves in me. There was no connection. They looked at me as an other, and I didn't have the words, the language, or the understanding at the time. But as I started studying and as I started learning, it was like, oh, okay, this makes sense. So when I was playing in the Western Hockey League, again, another story that I'll always remember. I remember getting called a racial slur in the WHL, and I don't know, it was around, maybe I was 19 or something like that. And quite understandably, I got, quite upset, and I was screaming and yelling and, trying to fight this guy and everything. And the ref got in the way and he just said, I heard it, I heard it. And as he said that, I naturally calmed down. The team later issued an apology, not the player, the team. And they suspended the player for the remaining games against our team for the remainder of the year, and then 2 games on top of it. So I think he got 4 games in total out of whatever, 6 games or whatever was left, something like that. And like, everyone was like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And it was, like, in terms of the sympathy was so high, but nobody was empathetic. Nobody understood. And again, I remember just being like, oh yeah, thanks. Like, I, try to be tough and just embrace it and not really let it show that it hurt. But I think what hurt more was that the league responded with a suspension. And in all honesty, we had a player that got run from behind. Like, it was a bad hit, whatever, it wasn't intentional. And then the player got traded to a team that we hadn't played yet. So we ended up playing him like 7 more times, and like, he had to fight. And I'm not saying that I condone fighting in most instances, but like, that was an opportunity where the culture would have accepted me dropping my gloves and letting me go at him, at least trying. And I think the shift away from fighting is beneficial for the game. But it's like the team gave me the apology, not that player. And the consequence was 2 games where he just didn't have to play me. So they just avoided the whole situation instead of actually dealing with the racial slur. And when I look at these kinds of stories, it's like we often get so afraid to deal with what is actually underneath it all. And what's underneath it all is that implicit bias, that implicit racism that we get told these messages over and over and over about different groups of people and these stereotypes that form and how they form. They really guide and change our socialization. We're doing this within a tenth of a second. So when we just go, well, you don't have to play that person, um, or you don't have to play that black. It's like we're just sweeping it under the rug for the next person because my guess is that that player learned absolutely nothing. There was no consequence outside of like, a couple games, but like whatever, who cares? Um, so like, you know, the team gets to sweep it under the rug, the league sweeps it under the rug, and who cares? It's only one colored player where it's not even a minority within the NHL because we're statistically insignificant as per the research. So it's just like it's as I learn more and I get more awareness, I realize like, well, there's a reason why I spent more time with Santi, and there's a reason why the coaches sort of like it's like why did I always have an issue with a coach? Why couldn't as somebody who played in the Western League, as somebody who played university level hockey, as somebody who's university educated, as somebody who's currently studying a master's of psychology, like where is my opportunity and where is my next step? And so much of that was I got pushed over for and I mean it in the as frustrated as I am to share it. It's like the little disabled white kid that gets the opportunity. Um, and so to contrast my experience, even when I was going in for my classification, which I struggled with, when the the next player a few years later, a white player, he had a, a very minor disability. Even like I have a minor disability, my ankle's fused. He had drop foot, so like he had full function of his foot, but every now and then it would just drop, and he would get stuck with it. Um, there was like the classification process, like it was easy. He went in one time, he was cleared. I had my bone was naturally fusing itself, and I still couldn't get cleared with medical documentation saying like within a matter of time, like not like 10 years, 20 years, like within a matter of like a year or so, my ankle will be fused. I went into the classification where my team doctor was like, you're not going to classify. To like he left, again, old school guy. I just wonder, like, would that experience been different if I was white? And I don't have the answer to that. So like I face a lot of challenges that way. Um, and as I become more educated, I'm realizing and recognizing like, well, it probably does have something to do with being the first black sledge hockey player in the country. Because if I was the second or third, maybe they had gone over some of these challenges and ironed out some of the kinks. Now, I will say this, going back to my time in the Western Hockey League, Willie Desjardins was my coach. When we're talking about masculinity and acceptance and so on, I will say I did appreciate Willie in terms of how he treated the players. I still think that there was some elements of um, internal biases, but I don't think Willie was a proponent of perpetuating that. And for sure, when it came to masculinity in hockey, he did not allow us to bully each other. He squashed it like as he knew about it. He was a true leader in he wanted good people on the team. He literally told me at one point he took me on the team because I was a good person. And he said he wanted to build the team with good players. And as I saw, people come and go, there's some pretty good players that, even went on to play in the NHL that he traded quite quickly because they weren't good people. So that was really nice to see, and I'm actually quite thrilled that he's back in Medicine Hat in the sort of more of a grassroots level. Not that, the NHL I think could really use a guy like that, um, to go just back into now sledge hockey, like one of the things that's been frustrating is as I turn into coaching sledge hockey, in my time, I never lost a game as a coach, coaching the provincial teams, coaching against all the other coaches that were at my main tryouts and were coming in as guest coaches. I out coached all of them. The guy I coached with got an opportunity to coach with the men's national team. And actually, which is, I think, very cool. Um, Tara Chisholm, she coaches the females sledge hockey team. Actually got to sit behind the bench or stand behind the bench in for the men's national team. And I mean, she's qualified. I'm excited and happy, and it's something that's telling me, things are starting to shift. But I'll say, like, where's my opportunity? I never got that opportunity um, to do that while I was coaching at the men's level. Uh, I played on the team. Like I've even in the world, there's nobody that has a higher level of like played stand-up hockey experience than myself that played at the highest level. So like with all my education, everything, it's like, well, why can't I get a break? And I would just go back to like, you know, let's look at Hockey Canada and like all the scandals and everything that have come up. And it's like, well, there's issues. Obviously, there's issues. So one of the things that I'm now trying to do is have these conversations. And I'm trying to take a bit of a different approach for the next colored person, the next queer person that wants to come up through the ranks, or the next female that, should be behind the men's bench of whatever team. It doesn't matter. Let's just get the best people. And as we can become aware of our aware or of our biases, and as we gain new awareness, we can start to shift and change those prejudices, those discriminations that we unnatural or naturally display and share. And so I fully plan to obviously continue with my master's of counseling. And even as I've started this, I've been intrigued into learning more about um, just like the next level, like what's the next level, whether that's in psychology, whether that's more directed in sport. But I'm starting to consider like what a doctorate would look like. Um, and then I just want to continue to support diversity and inclusion in sport because I'm at the point in my life where I think I can truly help as an advocate because Hockey Canada, whatever, sledge hockey, no one can really take anything away from me. They can't cut me from any more teams. Um, you know, like I used to speak up all the time about nutrition when I was playing with sledge hockey because I was quite a healthy guy. I still am, and when I would get to camp, I would start getting sick because of the way we were getting fed. And I would say like, hey, like this isn't like I eat better at home. Like, can we get some vegetables without butter? Can we just get them steamed? Because you're scooping the buffet style vegetables and the butter's dripping from the scoop, and they didn't really like that, and I would get reprimanded all the time. I remember we had a nutritionist come in and we're making smoothies right after practice, and they said you have a window of like 15 minutes or 10 minutes of when you need to get nutrients into your body to maximize the gains. And I remember getting yelled at because I wasn't at team stretch when I was literally making a smoothie and then heading to team stretch. So, I couldn't imagine if I spoke up about racial diversity. Way too scary to think about. I was already, fighting just to stay on the lifeline, stay on the boat. Um, so now as I enter this new role, as I get more educated, I feel much more liberal to just speak and advocate for other people, including just that change in masculinity in sport, because I think it kind of all boils up to um, it's the culture. It's starting from the top, because in any organization, in any school or any place I've worked, uh, when when the boss is good, usually the system works well. And that goes from schools where I've had good principals. It's been really nice working there, and the culture is great. When I've had not so good principals, culture suffers and people aren't happy. And I've noticed that a lot throughout, but I've also noticed that again, even in teaching, I always wonder, like, if I was white, it kind of comes back to that because people form these judgments, and I mean, I know that I have a very strong personality, and I will be confrontational at times because at this point for me, I just don't see that I have anything to lose. I only have stuff to gain, and if it's not for me, my hope is that it's for the next person that's coming up underneath me or behind me or however you want to say it. And I'm hoping that I can pave a little bit easier path for them so that they can do what they want to do, so that at the end of the day, you get the right person for the right job versus the white person for the job. Um, so, uh, I've it goes back to adversity. It goes back to adversity for me, and how it's going to be a constant or occasional companion for each of us throughout our lives, and how we react to it. The conversation is shifting, but it's still there, and it's just one step forward. And the more educated I get, the more knowledge I acquire, and the more I speak and share my story, and uh, the more conversations we have, the less barriers that are in place, and it's starting to build those stepping stones so that we can push through our adversity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kieran. I will invite folks, if they have any questions, to put them in the Q&A. While we're waiting for that, though, I'll start off with a question. So, Kieran, in an interview that you gave, you spoke about the dressing room in sledge hockey, and you said there was a feeling of depth, richness, authenticity, and
Yeah.
connection in the dressing room in sledge hockey. And obviously, many of us are looking for ways to change the toxicity of sporting culture. I wanted you to wonder if you could speak a little bit about what it was about the dressing room in sledge hockey and the culture of sledge hockey, and how you think that could inform other sports spaces that are dealing with toxic cultures.
Yeah, for sure. I think when it comes to the root of it, which is a bit of a challenge um, for many, is even I'll say the wealthy, because I mean hockey is a wealthy sport, and oftentimes that comes with a lot of privilege, and that privilege and expectation. And I just imagine, parents sharing that message with their kids, and then that the kid comes to hockey and is like, I'm this or that, and they've got the newest stick and the newest hockey equipment. Excuse me, in sledge hockey, everyone's faced adversity, which is, I think, a key determinant for that initial openness to the environment. So, whether it was like at the grassroots level, your mom or dad, brother or sister, aunt, uncle, whoever had that disability that got you into the sport, or whether you faced it, we'd all face something that humbled us in that sense of just our humility and our humanity of, like, we're not invincible. We are human beings. Like, we can be hurt, we can be damaged. And so I think that was a big determinant for the sledge hockey environment, which I haven't actually been able to like conceptualize in terms of stand-up hockey, how you'd share that same message. Um, so I think that's part of it. And then with that, people are just, it's like they just want to listen to your story, because it's like everyone has a story. And now I'll say that indefinitely, everyone has a story, stand-up hockey or not. In sledge hockey, when somebody walks or somebody wheels in or somebody hobbles in or comes in on crutches or whatever, they've got a story. So we take for whatever it's worth that person's story, and we sit and we listen, when I walk in as a black player, nobody says to me like, it's crazy. Like, how did you get here? Whereas when I come in and I'm, having a bad day and I've got a lot of arthritis and my pain's bugging me and I'm hobbling, they're like, what's going on? Like, how are you doing? Like, what's your injury all about? No, nobody says like, what's your whiteness all about? So it's that's a conversation that opens the door. And then it's like, well, I was cliff jumping and I went off the wrong spot and I broke my legs. And they're like, that's crazy. And look at like you're still standing here. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, tell me your story. And they're like, well, I mean, I heard stories of I sat down in class in grade 10, and throughout the class there was a tumor in my brain and it pressed on a nerve and I couldn't stand up at the end. To I was in the back of a cab truck and we had to stop suddenly because of a deer or whatever. And I went like this and I went like this and my neck went and I was paralyzed. So we get that humanness from each other, that versus that typical icebreaker of like, what's your favorite sport and what's your favorite animal? There's no depth to that. So I think that depth, and maybe that's the part of the key, is like when you introduce a team to each other, um, what's something that what's an adversity that you face? What's something that you had to do that was really tough? And maybe it's as tough as I had to write a math test and I didn't know any of the answers, and that still joins and connects people, because it's still some adversity. But I would say that that's probably one of the key determinants, because when I walk into the dressing room as a stand-up hockey player, um, especially now today, even on a good day, nobody like the people that I work with, the people that I play hockey with, unless I've explicitly told them, nobody has any clue that I even have a disability. So they'll see me on a bad day and they'll be like, "Oh, what happened to your leg?" Or "What happened to your knee or your ankle?" or whatever. Like they guess. And now like most of the time I just share. I'm like, "Oh, well, it's nothing. I'm having some arthritis and so on." I'm pretty point blank about it. But I would say that likely that the one of the big differences is, yeah, just that conversation, um, that happens naturally in the sledge hockey dressing room. Because seeing somebody with actually, it's fascinating. If you take the bottom part of the leg and you cut it off right here, and then you cut off here, so now the person has no knee. You can actually take this part of the foot and reattach it so that the ankle becomes, so your like your quad to your quad gets turned upside down and it gets reattached up here, so on your leg, not on your arm, and your ankle becomes your new knee. And then so you can actually like still move all your toes, you can still do this with your ankle, and that's a better knee than like, so if you get cancer and you have to have your leg amputated. So seeing somebody like that, it's like you just ask questions because you're curious, you want to know like what's it like, can you still feel everything? And so those conversations naturally unfold in the sledge hockey dressing room. In the stand-up room, they don't happen. So I think that's a big difference, is identifying that humanness in all of us.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to ask a bit of a selfish question because I'm also an
Yeah.
educator. I'm wondering how this experience informs your pedagogy, your teaching, like the experience of being a sledge hockey athlete, um, and the experience you went through. How does that inform your teaching?
uh, just on a couple things on just the openness that I have of people, I'll say generally. I use it to inform, like when I talk to somebody, and especially with my master's, I would even say is like a big contributor. I acknowledge like sometimes I'm just like tired and I'm like, okay, I've asked this question or answered this question, 5 times, and a kid comes and asks, and I'm just like, oh, to now just like trying to turn and just be more direct in that response so that I'm not showing some of that judgment that I might have. It's not going away. I still have the judgment, but it's maintaining my non-judgmental stance so that it's not, I'm not presuming, I'm not making someone feel insignificant or dumb or stupid or any of those, I'll say toxic words. And and then when it comes to sort of their all walks of life, when people come in, and especially I worked in a specialized school that was outreach for a lot of people with mental health challenges, including um, aggression all the way to autism. Um, Sometimes people are having a bad day and it's not about you. And I've really tried to take that to be educational and informal where I need to, but informal where I don't need to, so that um, as I have conversations with people, again, I'm not forming judgments, and I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible when I talk about share information. Even now, and I actually kind of put my foot in my mouth with a student, and I said, "All right, in my food, I have a foods class now." I said, "All right, ladies, like let's get cleaning up." And one of the students said, "Ladies, let's go." And I was like, "Yep." I'm like, "I did it." I'm like right in the mouth, and I so what I did is, like, this is a conversation I wouldn't have had prior um, to like sledge hockey, prior to my new education. I said my apologies. It is a bit of an old habit, um, and I said like, would you, or is there another way that I should address you? Because even they're just trying to avoid saying like, what's your preferred pronoun? Because it's not a preferred pronoun; it's a pronoun. It's not preferred. It's just it's a pronoun. So I was like, how would you like, or yeah, how should I address you? Um, because I recognize, like, in that conversation, or just in like the little laugh or whatever, I'm like, I apologize. Like, I shouldn't have said that, and some of my bias, and I said folks, or I think grade eights. I'm like, is that better? Yeah. And I said, okay. I said, my apologies again. And then I heard, like, just probably some coping and defense, snickering, like, all right, ladies, that's going to be our new slogan and stuff. But I know that that student heard the message, and the apology, and in just in acknowledging, like, it's not gonna happen overnight. And even as I talked about, how it's like we're blacks, and
Mm.
how do I even say it myself? I'm the first black sledge hockey player. And it's like, so it's informed so much of my life, but the conversation, it's changing. So it's like more education. And so that's, I would say, how I let it inform, is just keeping that open mindset to others' experience outside of my own, and being humble when I make mistakes, because I'm still learning too.
Mhm.
Even through my education, even through my own experience, I don't get it right all the time. So I just try to be very reflective in my pedagogy.
Yeah. Thank you for that response. Excuse me. We have a question from the audience. The question is, given the series is about hockey, what is your sense about the degree to which what you describe is about hockey versus sport in general? Said differently, what does hockey bring to these dynamics, and what is it about hockey that affords this?
That's a great question. I think it is happening in all
Yeah.
sports. I don't think there's I, yeah, I think it's happening in all sports. I think where it informs this conversation in hockey is that typically, who plays hockey? Well, affluential people. Well, typically, not always, but typically, who are our affluential people? Well, our no, members of the dominant culture, are Eurocentric, are white citizens typically. Um, when we look at sort of hockey culture, I can almost on a hand tell you the members of different ethnicities. I can probably tell you, like the 5, 6 players that I played against in the Western League and growing up, on a hand. Um, so that tells me that, like, as Canada especially becomes more populated by migrants coming, and soccer is, I mean, our soccer world is taking off. But so is our basketball, so is our other sports, because those are sports that sometimes all you need is a pair of shoes, and not even that. You can still run around and play soccer. If 1 out of 10 people have a ball, or 20 people have a ball, you can still play a game of soccer. Um, you can't play hockey if you don't have, the $2,500 worth of equipment on your body. Um, for a goalie, it's like a basic set for an adult's $4,000. So like the accessibility to hockey, so that it's naturally going to be limited, because, quite often these people who are moving, especially from these war-ridden countries right now, they don't have access to endless amounts of money to be like, oh, let's just sign you up for hockey. If you're going to play for fun, like, sure, the hockey equipment, it's $2,500 or 2 grand or whatever it is. And then you got to pay for the ice, which is another, I think, $350-$60 an hour. So, okay, so I can't just go out in my backyard and kick around a soccer ball or go with a friend and play. It's like I need to now be constantly paying money. So I think that's why it's important, because for the few that do enter the hockey world, and I mean few because I don't see that that's going to change anytime sort of soon. Um, it's like you're Evander Kane's. Actually, I'll say to Edmonton, to the Edmonton Oilers, they're my hometown team, so I cheer for them. But my whole life, they've had a black player on their team. My whole life, Theo Peckham, Sean Bell, who's a guy I grew up with, Mike Greer, Anson Carter, like Peter Worrell. I actually don't know if Peter Worrell played, but like the Grant Fuhrer, like all these players. Edmonton's always, it's actually, I don't know. I think it's quite fascinating that Edmonton's always had a player, but it's like, why isn't there 25 players? Why isn't there 35 players? Because the population, right? It doesn't afford itself the luxury for um, typical, and I say that with like the air quotes, your non-white community members. They just don't have the means to afford a sport like hockey, where it's costing thousands of dollars.
Absolutely. And I think the national status of the sport and the privilege that the players get in their hometowns and in our society also contribute to the distinct toxicity of hockey culture. And I know my co-organizers have written about that.
Yeah.
So as we end, yeah, thank you. As we end today, I just wanted to mention to folks, if they want to know more about your story, you do have a book called The Ups and Downs of Almost Dying. I
Yep.
think that's from 2017. Is that correct?
Yep. Yep.
So if people want to learn more about your story, but is there anything as we end here today that you wanted to let people know about, or I'll invite my co-organizers back if they had any comments before we sign off?
No, I just thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to my story and my news story, as I once just spoke about sort of how I climbed the ranks and played sledge hockey and did all this and that. And now I'm getting into more behind the scenes of, some of my experience and the challenges. So yeah, thanks for taking the time listening today. I appreciate it. And yeah, if there's any questions or whatever that come up, I am available to listen, or to listen. I am available to respond if something comes up outside of today. I'm happy to answer. So thanks.
Thank you very much. And just